long ago, in the time before men became aware. In darkness and shadows, a being was assigned to Terra to watch over the growth of mankind. The Sumerians called this being Enki, and over time he began to shape and control men's minds. This was until a great war was fought, and Enki was drowned in the river that carried his most precious reeds. Over time, men forgot about Enki, and myth became legend. And what was once a real threat was now just a story. Over the millennia, Enki would reform his being to gain followers, to gain control. But he would always be defeated. In the early 20th century, Enki inhabited the form of Rasputin, his most powerful form in centuries, and yet still, he was defeated. His spirit came to full power again in the year 1999 in the body of a man named Redi. Now, living near the mythical land of Telos, Redi began to build a new army. With his square beard, sing-songy voice, and promise of power, Redi began to reverberate to the world around him. 20 years after his initial school of his new class of minions, the world had become entirely changed. Redi's dankneys now emanated from every orifice of society. The very soul of man had once again been corrupted, just as it had been 4,500 years prior. Three who had rejected Redi's instruction, whose names were Russell, Jim, and Girion, now lived apart from society and tried to ignore Redi's will and influence. This changed at one point when Girion found out he was dying from an incurable illness. Not being a part of the world still bound him to its latent effects. Girion thought of a crazy plan to cure himself, destroy Redi. He began reading books on ancient history and devised a plan. Girion presented this to Russell, but was outright denied as it didn't work 20 years prior. Regardless, Girion went about the work on his own. First, he cast himself a bronze blade and carried it high on the edge of the Shastina Peak. He meditated and came into contact with a TR-3BB triangular UFO and was transported above the bounds of the Earth. Girion used telepathy learned from Redi to interact with the shadow creatures to get them to write down specific words of creation on the bronze sword. His trade with the beings was a promise of destruction of Redi. Once done, Girion was cast back down to Earth in a translucent bubble near the basin on the east side of Herd Peak. When he crashed into the ground, he lifted his sword in the air, and a great beam of light came out and illuminated a 300-foot-tall lamassu in which Redi had hidden his celestial form. Girion cast his bubble into a translucent low polygon horse and rode it into battle against Redi's lamassu. After an intense battle, Girion was triumphant, but as a final blow, the lamassu opened its mouth and sucked in all time and space. And in this space, Girion saw all things and everything at once, and was given a large share of Redi's power, which included near eternal life. To Girion was given the power to cast green lightning from the ether. To Russell was the ability to cast fire and complete heat damage protection. To Jim was given the power to form powerful ice shards and shields. The shadow beings were satisfied with this development and left the world alone for the next few thousand years. During this time, the trio did not age, but they began to take down Redi's older minions in all the corners of the Earth. The first negative blow to the trio was after sailing a pirate ship onto Banyan Isle and fighting the wood minion Bayan at the center of his tree. While fighting, Jim was killed by a root piercing his heart. Girion and Russell destroyed the minion, but were unable to revive Jim. The next blow would be when fighting the final minion, the strongest of them all, Minion Tetris Poodle. At the top of his high tower, as Girion and Russell put in their final blows, Tetris pulled down Russell as he fell dead from the tower. When his body reached the bottom, Russell's body was already gone. For the next 2,000 years, Girion searched for Russell, but could not find him or his body anywhere. In this time, which should have been great peace for mankind, he noticed that the dankness of Redi was still everywhere on Terra. One night in the middle of Neo-Tokyo, Girion began to cast lightning on all mortals, incinerating them. Through the night, Girion would cast larger and larger lightning until the whole city was destroyed. This brought immediate consequences from the shadow beings whose ships appeared in the sky the next morning and were going to destroy Girion. In defense of himself, Girion empowered his old bronze blade and shot a beam of power upward into the sky that created a protection net around Terra that would repel the shadow beings. From this moment, Girion declared himself Emperor of New Terra and set about to destroy all mankind. Girion spared adults of small stature, whom he called imps, and put them into service to build his pyramid around the net of power. Over the next few hundred years, Girion would destroy all human settlements and begin to terraform the planet into a giant garden. Survivors of men hid themselves deep underground, as they would be destroyed if they were visible. At night, they would come out to steal foods from the gardens if they were not caught by the robotic mops that tended and maintained the landscape. Girion's final black pyramid was 1 kilometer tall at its peak, and the power from the sword sent the protection net up like a beam of green light from its peak. This beam was visible for hundreds of miles away at night. During the evening, Girion's imps would put on theater shows of all his feats of greatness. But he still desired to find out what happened to Russell's body. In the year 9070, Girion was out among his vineyards when he heard an alert. He transported himself back to his pyramid riding on top of his black skeet glider. It was a triangular vehicle that he would fly on to and from the peak landing port at his pyramid. When he arrived at the pyramid, his imps informed them of a capture. It was a witch of the reeds. Ever since Reedy was destroyed, a partial amount of his power went to a group of Reedy cultist witches that were working to bring him back to physical existence. Girion had been searching out these witches as he believed they had taken Russell's body, either alive or dead. Girion tortured the witch with lightning to get a response. Once he had fried off nearly all her skin, she gave a location. Girion locked the witch away and took a group of imps to investigate. They found Russell's body unconscious, but unchanged. Girion had them take it back to the pyramid to see if they could revive him. Once they arrived, Girion noticed a group of witches off in the far distance, holding hands in a circle, floating upward. Girion hopped on his skeet and flew towards them. The closer he got, the faster they went, and they drove themselves directly into the bottom of the protection shield, causing a huge explosion, and Girion flew to the ground. At this time, another huge explosion happened off in the distance, and the entire top of the pyramid had exploded, and only the sword was left standing. Injured Girion called for his polygonal translucent steed and rode as fast as he could back to the site. When he arrived, Russell was awake and had exploded the pyramid with fire. It was a trap by the witches to bring Reedy back. Russell was completely uncontrollable, setting blazes to anything that came near. At the same time, the water in the plants began to excrete and become a great fog on the land. The fog was forming a miles-high square beard cloud. Girion rushed to the sword and was pushing Russell back by directing lightning to him. Russell was too strong. His eyes were alight with fire, getting closer and blocking the electricity with flame. As Girion saw Reedy taking shape, he tried one final move in order to save his realm. He conjured the sword to fly to him, which went through his stomach and then through Russell. This worked, and the sword stopped Russell as it stabbed him into the ground. But the Terra protection net came down, and hundreds of thousands of UFOs filled the air. As Girion fell to his knees and looked up, Reedy reclaimed his full form in clouds, and the whole earth sounded out his laughter. From Reedy's mouth, a great wind came and blew back time to 1999. As the sky returned, Jim, Russell, and Girion were all teenagers again at the foot of Telos, looking at the sky receding. It became immediately apparent this episode was simply an 8,000-year-long musing of Reedy playing puppeteer once again.